Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar on the 2024 Clean Energy Industry Report, presented by the Joint Committee of the Connecticut Energy Efficiency Board and the Connecticut Green Bank's Board of Directors. My name is Rudy Stirk, the Director of Marketing and Communications at the Connecticut Green Bank, and I will get us started here on our presentation today. First, a very simple agenda for today. We're going to share the findings of the 5th annual report tracking clean energy employment in Connecticut. The Joint Committee commissioned BW Research Partnership to produce this report, as well as the previous 4 reports, with financial support provided by the Connecticut Green Bank, Eversource, and Avangrid Inc., subsidiaries UI, SCG, and CNG. If you haven't already done so, you can access this report and download it from the link on the screen here from the Green Bank's website on our strategy and impact section of the website. We will have time at the end for questions and answers, so please feel free to enter your questions throughout the presentation into the GoToWebinar box, and we will address them at the end. So without any further delay, I'm going to introduce our presenters today. We have Brenda Watson, the chair of the Joint Committee and the executive director of the North Hartford Partnership. And we have Philip Jordan, the vice president and principal researcher from BW Research Partnership. And I'm going to now turn it over to Brenda to give us an overview of the Joint Committee.
Thank you very much, Rudy. So formed under state law to coordinate energy efficiency and green energy programs, the Joint Committee's goal is to help reduce long-term energy costs and environmental impacts. The Connecticut General Assembly created the Joint Committee to ensure that the programs and activities of the Efficiency Fund and the Green Bank were being coordinated. Developing a principal statement to guide our work, which is essentially to support the implementation of state energy policy across all market segments, while also increasing more private investment and ensuring that the consumer experience is a good one. We meet quarterly, and we, of course, invite all members of the public, as well as the folks in the audience today, to join our next meeting. I'll go ahead and ask Rudy to advance us to the next slide. Actually, before we do that, our next meeting is June 18th from 1:30 to 3:30, and happy to ensure that the meeting link is sent to everyone on this call today. Next slide, Rudy. I'm now going to introduce members of the Joint Committee, which include Melissa Copps, who's a project manager and architect for the City of New Haven, John Viglione, who's an economist with the Office of Consumer Counsel, representatives from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, Becca Treich. I'm sorry, I hope I did not ruin her last name. Director of Office of Building and Transportation Decarbonization. She works with Deputy Commissioner of Energy, Joe De Nicola. And we have Green Bank board representatives, which include myself. As Rudy noted earlier, I'm the executive director of the North Hartford Partnership. I'm also chair of the joint EEB, the Energy Efficiency Board, and Green Bank Committee. And I serve alongside John Harity, who's also a fellow Green Bank board member and chair of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. And we also have members of the staff, the Green Bank staff, which includes Steve Bruno from Eversource. Staff members, including Steve Bruno from Eversource, Jillian Winterkin and Amy McLean Sauls from Avangrid, and Brian Garcia of the Connecticut Green Bank. Next slide. I will now pass it on over to the folks at BW Research to take it from here.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us here today to present this report, and thank you for entrusting us for another year with this important research endeavor to quantify the clean energy and traditional energy employment in Connecticut. This is our 5th annual Clean Energy Industry Report, and we include data that looks at specific clean energy technologies across a variety of activities and throughout the value chain, as well as some traditional energy sectors as well. And ultimately, this data is drawn from the 2024 U.S. Energy and Employment Report, which is produced by the U.S. Department of Energy and relies on a survey nationwide of about 40 to 50,000 businesses annually. 593 of these coming from the state of Connecticut, which gives us a margin of error in Connecticut at plus or minus just under 4%. For those statistical folks out there who are interested, that's at a 95% confidence interval. So this is a direct, these numbers are drawn from direct outreach to Connecticut businesses that are engaged in the energy sector throughout the state. And we use this U.S. Energy Employment Report data, as well as data from the state and federal departments of labor. So if we go to the next slide, we can show you the progress that has been made going back to 2015 in the state of Connecticut for overall employment in clean energy. So some really interesting key findings. First, there are almost just very close to 46,000 clean energy jobs statewide in Connecticut, with almost 4% growth over the last year, which is the strongest year-over-year growth going back to 2015. We now represent, the sector now represents 2.7% of total jobs in the state as of 2023. And just to give you a frame of reference.
Phil, just 1 second. Rudy, could you advance to the next slide?
I'm seeing the overall employment slide, so I think we're.
Oh, okay, I'm not seeing it on my end.
Yeah, maybe a delay in the
Okay.
but
Okay.
hopefully we're okay. But appreciate that. And so at 2.7%, you know, this is a pretty large number when we look across the U.S. and it represents significant growth in the state going back to 2015. If we go to the next slide, we can show you some more detail about what this growth means. So part of the reason why we see an increasing percentage of overall jobs is because the Connecticut clean energy sector is growing quite a lot faster than the Connecticut economy-wide average. So the state of Connecticut from 2022 to 2023, employment grew by 1.4%, while employment in clean energy grew by 3.9%. So not quite 3 times faster, but almost. So really very, very strong growth. And what we see regionally is that's comparable to Massachusetts, more than Maine and Rhode Island. So in terms of looking at the southern New England states as well as Maine, Connecticut is at or above. And we did see a bit faster growth in New York with some of the significant state level investments that they have put forth. So really exciting numbers, we think, from a growth perspective in Connecticut. Go to the next slide. We can look at some more detail about the technology sectors. So broadly speaking, we look at 5 core areas: energy efficiency, which really is related to building efficiency; clean energy generation, which is largely focused around the renewables space; alternative transportation, which includes electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, fuel cells, etc. Clean grid and storage, you know, the biggest segment there is the batteries, and clean fuels, which largely encompasses biofuels and other renewable fuel sources. So the 3 fastest growing sectors outpace national growth rates. So that was alternative transportation, which is really driven by those hybrid electric vehicles. And that includes the repair and maintenance of those vehicles as well. Clean grid and storage, again, driven by energy storage around new battery technologies. And clean energy generation, really driven by solar deployment. If we go to the next slide, you can see some of the specifics around energy efficiency sectors. So this is where we still see as the primary driver of overall number of jobs, so 770 new jobs over the year, and the largest technology sector. High efficiency HVAC and renewable heating and cooling is about 29%, but is still below its 2019 employment. So I think if there's sort of one sector that we see as sort of not keeping pace with some of the national numbers and some of the regional competitors or neighbors or friends, however you want to look at them, energy efficiency is the area that is growing a bit more slowly. All of the northeastern states have seen some challenges around energy efficiency growth coming out of the pandemic, it is we haven't fully sort of diagnosed why it's slower. We do know that in some of the early years it was perhaps related to some of the direct COVID slowdowns. We have less answers as we get further down the line why it's moving a little bit more slowly than some other states, but it is something worth keeping an eye on. If we go to the next slide, we can look in more detail at clean energy generation. Clean energy generation is growing quite quickly. So solar added 270 jobs in 2023. That growth has been projected to continue through 2024. And so hopefully in the sixth report, we'll have some additional positive information about solar. 59% of clean energy generation employment. And the wind and traditional hydropower jobs grew faster in 2020, from 2022 to 2023 than all other sectors. I did just want to note here that there are a couple of things to think about in terms of the national context, without going into too much detail on what's happening in Washington. Certainly the House bill that has passed has some carve-outs for nuclear, which is an important component of the clean energy generation sector in Connecticut. May include some additional opportunities in nuclear, but has some pretty significant impacts to solar and wind that we don't really need to go into, but definitely something to keep an eye on in future reports, as those industries are reporting very significant concerns over some of the provisions in that bill that is making its way through Congress. If we go to the next slide, we'll get into the value chain employment, which looks at sort of what people or companies are doing within each of these segments. So the largest of all of the segments, and the one that added the most jobs over the year, is construction. It's about 44% of all of the clean energy jobs as of 2023. This makes sense. This is the people who are installing the solar panels, people who are doing the retrofits and new construction of buildings and their efficiency measures, building out of charging stations and other sort of infrastructure. So all of those things are in the construction sector, so not surprising that it's the largest, and also is demonstrated in its strength by the investments and policies that are geared towards deploying technologies. The good news here for the state of Connecticut, though, is that it has strength across all of these different segments. So what we see is, a pretty significant growth among utility investment, growth in manufacturing, which is obviously of critical importance to the state, wholesale trade, and the professional business services, all growing over the last year. So we're seeing strength and growth across all of these technology sectors, which is, of course, is good news for the state's economy. Go to the next slide. We can talk about a little bit of a different metric, and that is contributions to gross regional product. So gross regional product is the same thing as we hear about GDP. Gross regional product is just how we measure that for the state. And so one of the things that we want to look at is how much is clean energy contributing to the economy in terms of dollars and cents value to the Connecticut state economy. And what we see now is more than $7 billion worth of GDP or GRP added from clean energy activities. That's 2.4% of Connecticut's total gross regional product, which is 1 out of every $40. That's pretty impressive. And this is increasing also, like employment, it's increasing faster than overall GRP growth. So those clean energy contributions increased by 3.1% from 2022 to 2023. So all very exciting. This is driven by basically the amount of money that Connecticut is able to bring in or keep in its economy and the ripple effects that it has throughout. So exciting that Connecticut is building not only jobs, but also a stronger economy through its clean energy sector. Go to the next slide. We look at county employment. So in the report, we look at a few different measures around county employment, but here we just have the overall jobs figure. And you can see that this largely mirrors some of the population trends in Connecticut. It's not terribly surprising. But we see Hartford, Fairfield, and New Haven counties employ 80% of the clean energy workers, and a significant portion, almost 14,600 in Hartford County, where we also saw the greatest number of jobs added. So there are a couple of key takeaways here, right? Yes, because it's largely focused on deployment, we see that it tracks closely to population, but we also see that there is significant clean energy employment growth in every county of the state. If we go to the next slide, we can look at demographics. And a couple of key findings is that while Connecticut's clean energy workforce is less gender and racially diverse than its overall workforce, it is pretty consistent with the US clean energy sector. We'll note that for minorities and mixed race, it's quite close to the Connecticut overall averages, but women in particular remain quite underrepresented. This is largely driven by underrepresentation in those construction fields, which are making up almost half of the employment. So there are some historic challenges there and some industry-specific challenges there that are important. One thing that we would note is that similar to the U.S. clean energy average, the workforce is in fact younger than the overall workforce in Connecticut, with 13% at 55 years and over. And so we don't have some of the same retirement challenges that we see in some of the other sectors, though we still see pretty high difficulties finding workers. So again, something that's important to address, while also noting that veterans have found clean energy sector to be a significant employer. The rate is 3 times higher for their employment in clean energy than the Connecticut economy overall. So those are some of the demographic trends that we look at. And then we also look at traditional energy employment. So this looks at some of the energy activities in the state that fall outside of the state's definition of clean energy. And you can see here that there are about 28,600 traditional energy workers in Connecticut. And we see that the clean energy employment has grown while the traditional energy employment has declined, and we can show you some of the specifics there. A lot of that is driven by motor vehicles, as well as a change in the way that we're doing transmission and distribution. Though we do see clearly some declines also in fuels. Electric power generation, on the other hand, has grown in the traditional economy. If we go to the next slide, we can look at some of the specifics. So here we see, as I mentioned, the electric power generation has grown. Most of that has been the result of growth in natural gas electricity generation. And you can see some of the other technology areas. Oftentimes when we are asked about these slides, we'll say like, well, how could we, we don't have any other electricity, or our coal plants are retired, or how could we be having employment in any of these categories? Remember that we include the entire value chain. So there's consulting services, there's environmental remediation services, there's manufacturing, there's a whole host of activities, as well as workers in particular who may be members of labor unions who are travelers and go to other sites. So there can be reasons for having employment across some technology areas that may not make sense at first blush, but once you sort of dig under the data and see where those workers are, we understand why they are where they are. But again, most of this growth driven by this natural gas electricity growth. Okay, so that sort of concludes our presentation. Just wanted to end by thanking my team here for their work on this. And you see all of the members here. All of us are available at any time for any questions that you have. You can reach out to me or You can reach out to any member of the project team. Particularly want to thank Sophia Nelson, who's here also to answer any questions if there are any from the audience, who's an associate project manager who really led the bulk of the work on this project. And again, just wanted to thank the entire group here today in the state of Connecticut for continuing to do this important work and to continue to put your trust in us to provide this information. And we look forward to answering any questions that you have. So I think at this point, I will turn it back over to Rudy to moderate any questions.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Brenda. Appreciate you both sharing that information here today with us. So we'll pause now. If there are questions from anyone in the audience, please feel free to put them into the GoToMeeting. And we'll pause briefly here. Okay. Well, not seeing any questions come in. I will again thank Philip and the BW research team for all their work on this report. If you haven't downloaded it, please go to our website. You can access it there. This recording will be posted on our webinar as well. So if anyone wants to share it or watch it again, please feel free. If there are any questions that come up after the fact, certainly reach out to us directly. We'll connect you with Philip and his team. Thank you all for attending today. We will conclude the webinar here.
Thank you, Rudy, and thank you everyone at BW Research for this wonderful comprehensive report, and thanks for everyone for joining.